So this is your multi-generational business. You know, this is, you guys have just sort of developed it and you've passed it on. But Brian, what are you doing up here? Like,
I don't know.
What's your, I mean, other than the fact that I told you had to come up here, like, what is your interest in this? Like, what about it is appealing to you?
I guess I qualify as the quintessential consumer of them when they were in their heyday back in the 70s. So kind of growing up in Florida, you used to see them in every turnpike rest stop. They were in every state park, every theme park. And you just can't forget the smell of the hot, waxy plastic that you would get as a kid. And that was probably your prized souvenir when you get home, because you got to see it made. It was your choice to make that toy come out of the machine. And so just that being a huge memory for me, and also a huge hoarder of vintage things. If you've seen the show floor, that's kind of what my passion is in this world. Jam. But what was it, 2 years ago now, that I finally decided to look out there and say, do these exist? And happened across Tim.
Well, it was actually 2019.
Yeah.
It was, sometime before?
Yeah, just before the whole COVID thing.
Well, no, it was actually before the last free play you did was in 2019 when we first did it.
Yep.
So it was spring? I think it was springtime that year that you...
Yeah, that was the first time I think I just blindly reached out to you to just see if you'd even respond.
And then you came down to the shop and everything. And
yeah, next thing you know, we're actually pretty good friends now. And he's been instrumental in helping me get my dream machine was the Disney version of the Mold-A-Matic machine that dispenses the Disney characters. So over the course of the couple of years now, I've painstakingly restored the exterior of a machine that I now have, and Tim did all the interior, and it's amazing. You can see it out there on the floor.
But, we have sound effects.
Oh yeah, his is the one that had the Disney castle on top of it. That's Brian's.
Which is, we'll get into that part of the story later. But I guess that's my story. I'm just really just a huge fan, and I just love to keep them preserved and out there in the public for you to see again, and just remind you of this awesome stuff. And you operate, 70 of them now?
Yeah, it's right about 70. Throughout the state of Florida and Ohio and Tennessee and Oklahoma.
So yeah, you can go to almost any state zoo or Busch Gardens, places like that, and you can actually get them today. So if you didn't know that, next time you go to one of those places, seek them out. Have that nostalgia hit.
Well, Wiki Watchies even still got them.
Yep. Remember the mermaids?
The mermaid up in Hernando County, the mermaid place has even got them.
Yep.
So I want to come back to the restoration and even just the mechanics and all of the machines that you guys operate. But I just wanted to. Okay, you're probably asking, well, what is Tim doing up here? Well, so I grew up with Mold-A-Ramas as well, but in the Chicago area, which is where I'm from. We're really close to Brookfield Zoo, which I think right now has 16 machines, and now those are not operated by you guys.
No.
It's another company called Mold-A-Rama, right? Which is separate.
But it's another family that's been into it since the 70s.
And your families are pretty close. Like you guys are it's not like you're rivals or something. You're well connected to each other.
No, we're connected to get to each other. We do a lot of things together and order parts.
Right, and so you guys are talk, but also your families have known each other for years, right?
Oh yeah, my grandfather and his dad were friends since way back.
So that's really cool. It's like between the you guys are the two last really remaining big companies, and like all the machines that are out there are pretty much either yours or his, right?
Yes.
That's really cool, and that's fun, and I just love that it's like multi-generational families. So I grew up in Chicago, going to as a kid going to field trips, the Museum of Science and Industry or the Brookfield Zoo, and getting a mold, and you smell them because they have that awesome weird like molten plastic smell, and if you're not careful you burn your hand, but no liability or anything like that. But so like I grew up with those, and then I had a collection of those because we would go to the zoo, and now I've got young kids, and one of our activities during the pandemic and during shutdown is like, well, where could we go that was safe? Well, we go outside to the zoo, and my kids just started getting really into, let's collect them, let's see how many we can get. And then we sort of discovered that, people were trading them on the internet. There's a couple of I think both of you guys are in the Facebook group that's very, very active. And we just sort of went deep down a rabbit hole. And now, I think my wife's like, you have almost 100 of these.
That's it?
And it's like,
just 100?
I need some time here. It's like, I can only go so fast. You can help me out, though. I mean, I'm going to come home with a whole suitcase full of these. My wife's
should probably throw you out.
I hope not.
That was one of the crazy things I learned as I started to get, more and more exposed to the modern day fan of these things, and finding out that they're essentially just like baseball cards.
Yes.
There's people that collect, error, like print error cards, or there's a certain color that were made at a certain place at a certain time, and people are able to identify that at this point in time.
Well, and most of them are engraved from where they're from.
Right.
They all had a park or, and usually different times. We'll run the same molds continuously throughout the year, or different seasons, like for Halloween and different ones are like that. But we'll try to change the color of what it was from the year before.
And now you guys are also commissioning new molds for different holidays. For you had new ones for Universal, right? For Halloween,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, I got new ones. There was new ones for Halloween this year, and there was a new one last year too.
And so talk about and Brian, weigh in on this too, when a new mold, because there was a while where there weren't a whole lot of new molds. And so now when you guys create a new mold, what happens? It feels like people are talking about that and people are interested. And how does that process go?
Got to start out with a sculpture. Decide what you actually would like to have designed, and find an artist and have them make a sculpture up of it. And then it goes from that to the foundry to make a negative of what the mold actually looks like, and then from that it goes into the casting to cast it into aluminum into sand casting.
Yeah, it's a very manual.
It's a manual.
Very
It's
manual
a lot
process.
It's a long process to get them going that way.
Yeah, and I kind of learned through the this year we made if you see it out there, the Free Play Florida mold that is out there, it's a lot more complicated than you would think, because you can't just mold anything.
Well, you designed that one on the computer though, wasn't it?
Yep.
That was CAD drawn and then 3D printed.
It was a 3D print actually that we used as the base, but unless you think like a mold maker, you don't think about things like how do you part the lines for the mold to separate? How do you make sure that there's nothing that undercuts and goes behind
Right.
the mold so that
Yeah.
they can separate?
You can't have nothing that actually tucks up behind where something will go behind it, because as soon as it pulls apart, it will not come out.
Right.
Right, so you got to think about the last end of the process before
Right.
you really start the first step of creating the mold. And so you probably know, okay, what molds sell well, which ones are kind of dogs. What are the most popular molds?
Most of the zoo animals.
Zoo
A lot of
animals?
zoo animals, and like all the Christmas ones are really good, and then a lot of the Halloween ones, they really like. The skull one does really well.
That one's fun. I've seen that one in a lot of colors.
Right. There's one guy on one of the collector sites that has, I don't know, like 30 some different colors or something. He had a bunch of different colors of it.
Yeah. And you realize what it takes to change a color, right?
Talk about that. Why don't you talk about you guys picture what's inside of these machines. What happens? Once you walk me through the process of what happens when you put a quarter, more than one quarter, but you put your money in. What is going on inside of the machine?
Well, when you drop your money in the machine, it actually triggers relays, and then sends a signal back to a bunch of switches that starts a timing cam. And the timing cam starts, and then that starts turning and triggers each one of the valves for the mold arms to start the mold arms to close. And each valve does a different cylinder, so all of them there's 4 valves in there, and each one does something different. And then it goes through different stages. It gives it a blast of air. There's a cooling stage where it stops for a second and shuts everything down and lets it continue, and then it starts back up, and then the molds open up, and the delivery scraper drops it down to you.
And for those familiar with pinball, it's almost identical to like an old electromechanical pinball machine scoring cam.
Right, the timing cams.
Yep, the timing cam. So that it's basically these wheels with notches, and as the wheels turn, the different notches trigger different things, and it's all sequential, so that all the pieces and parts happen at the right times. So
All right, so that was super technical for me, and it's like, I can't even program my VCR. So like, let's
have a VCR?
I
All right,
used to
so
have
you put
VCR.
your money in, it starts, and it just continues to run on the timing cam. It'll cycle out and finish for you.
Right. So there's a vat of molten.
Oh yeah, there's like almost 2 gallons of molten plastic underneath the molds where the molds sit on the plate. There's a vat underneath there is full of liquid, and it's about a gallon and a half, and it's always liquefied. And as the machine runs, it puts more in to replenish it. It's got a self-feeding auger that feeds it back in.
So it shoots it into there, right? Or is
right.
it?
It's actually an auger. It's actually like a screw auger. So it actually, when it turns the auger and just feeds in a little bit at a time.
Cool. And then it pushes the air through the mold, right? It's a blow.
Right. It
blow
blows
mold.
it blows it up through the mold and hollows the mold out inside.
And then all that extra gets
Goes
dumped.
back into the liquid vat.
Okay. And then that cools, and then the pieces separate, and then the arm pushes it down, and you get
pushes
your
it down, and there's your product.
Awesome. All right.
Yep. Like it's like the vintage. Almost everybody remembers the plastic blow molded Santa Claus and pumpkins from Halloween that you would see back in the 70s.
Yeah.
It's the same process, just on a different
Smaller scale.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to ask you guys. We've talked technical, but I want to talk like sort of the philosophy. Like what is it about? I mean, there's all kinds of little tchotchkes and things, like from the same era, like that we're not still talking about. There's not a panel about the pet rock, right? Like there's all these other things from this other area that, this other time that we're not talking about, but we are talking about Mold-A-Ramas. What is the enduring appeal of a sort of like, put your money in and you get something out of this machine? Like these are the same machines, right? Like from the
Same
the
exact
60s.
machines. Nothing's ever changed.
Right. No. So you've not made any new machines, right?
No, nothing's been made new. They're all still the original vintage.
So what is it about people keep coming back to these? What's the appeal?
A lot of it's the smell of it. I mean, the smell will draw you in instantly.
Yeah. There's very few people that live in especially the Chicago and the Florida areas that don't know that smell instantly. You don't even need to see the machine. You just know.
You can walk in a room and it's not a strong. It's just strong enough that you can get the smell of it as you walk in.
Yeah.
It's not something that blasts you that like, oh my gosh, that's overwhelming. But you'll have that distinct little smell in the air that you'll know it's there.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
just like you're instantly it takes your mind back to I got that one of those at Gatorland.
Put it this way.
Yeah.
Brandon had to come in the show yesterday and had to stick his head in the receiving box to get his fix so he could continue on through the night.
All right.
It's a
So,
pretty big head
was,
to get.
that
in
was
in
a pretty
receiving
big head
box.
to get in the box.
so there may or may not be an addictive property. Unique Souvenirs is not responsible for any, anything that happens to you if you do that. Okay, there's the smell, but let's talk about this. I mean, you guys have mentioned sort of like going to a specific place and getting the mold. I mean, for me, it was the basement of the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, and I don't know if it was the train or if it was, one of the other ones. Like, it was like for me, it was like, okay, it's connected to a time and a place, and I went there and I said, I went to the Museum of Science and Industry on my 3rd grade school trip, and I got this train, or I got whatever, the coal mine or whatever it is, and it's very specific. It was a souvenir that's tied to a thing that I did and a place that I went. Like, is that part of the interest and the value?
Well, yeah, that too, because you go like the Weeki Wachee, and you're going to walk out of there with a mermaid or a girl on a seahorse. So the mermaid's your connection with Weeki Wachee.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even like Busch Gardens and all them, some of that stuff, the animals and stuff are connected with that. The train ride, people connect different ones with different ones.
So it really is. It's not just you're not just getting a toy, like or like a fun collectible. You're getting a souvenir of a place that you've been, and it's tied to that
You're
place.
getting a souvenir of a place that you've been, and plus it's engraved. It says where it's from.
Yeah. And it's basically literally a snapshot in time. Because there's not only you get to watch the plastic, you get to watch the process happen, and it's a one of one for you at that specific time and moment, and those are the things that fit. They stick more in your mind, at least in my opinion, anyway.
And you said it's a one of one because now if I'm right behind you in line to get one, if I get the space capsule or whatever, mine's going to be a little bit different than yours, right?
Yeah. every casting seems to have certain little.
There's a little, each one has something a little different about it.
And then once you start exploring like the history and the rabbit hole there, and you start exploring where they all debuted in the World's Fairs back in the early '60s, it gets fascinating what happened back then.
Well, and I just love, like, you know, the things that end up getting molded. I mean, obviously there's a Free Play Florida one. So, you know, 40 years from now, when Free Play Florida has sort of taken over the earth, you know, and it has conventions in every city, you can say, oh, remember back then? You know, it's this weird window of time of this thing that happened at some point. But then if you look at some of these older molds, you know, that were made for all kinds of reasons that, you know, we don't actually know now. I mean, there's one that I like. It's a company, I don't know, the company's called Humble, the Humble Company.
Humble Oil?
Yeah, that's an oil company. They made it one of their building. And it's not even like a remarkable building. It's not like it's the St. Louis Arch or anything. It's just a tall building.
Well, the Humble Oil, just so you know, the Humble Oil is actually Exxon. No.
Oh,
Humble
yeah,
went
very
from
humble.
Humble's is Exxon Oil Company now.
Oh, wow, that's crazy. So back when they were just a Humble Oil company,
Right.
they wanted to make a mold of their building. But I mean, I don't know.
But there's a bunch of them that were advertisements for like that. There's an Esso Tiger. There's Oil Drop.
See, I think that's so fun because it also talks about a different time. Like, that feels like, you know, I mean, no one's, like, we were talking about this earlier, no one's going to be super excited about I'm going to get an Amazon fulfillment center Mold-A-Rama. I mean, like, woohoo! You know, it's like, great.
You never know.
Hey, actually, I would probably buy that. Or maybe it's a
people like
slightly
Amazon.
damaged package, you know, with the Amazon logo on it. You know, you're like, yeah, some guy threw this from my driveway. You know, it's like.
Or the
But-
USPS one that you just don't get.
Right.
Yes. Right, the one that's still stuck at the FedEx building.
Exactly. So, but I mean, like, that I think is for collectors. I think that's a fun sort of snapshot in time. Like, you know, the oil drop, you know, it's like a mascot, you know, for that same company. And like, they're kind of weird and sort of quirky, but I think that's kind of fun. And that's I feel like in some ways that's a little bit different way that you would approach that now. And I think that for collectors, I think like trying to understand the stories of some of those is really, really fun as well. Now, and you know all that history. Like, I'm like, oh, it's a humble building. You know everything about it. You know, so like,
Pretty much.
How do you know all that stuff? Just because you're around it, or it's like, are they interesting to you
just,
too?
Just different things I've researched and looked up on them, different just categories, just to see what certain molds were. I mean, there's certain ones that still don't make sense.
Like what? Like, throw one out.
Like there's one of the Empire State Building. Where would they ever ran that?
Not in the Empire State Building? Maybe.
Don't know.
Because I know there was one in the Sears Tower, right? There's a
Right.
Sears
Well,
Tower
that was
one.
actually ran at Sears Tower.
Yeah.
That's a brand new mold. That mold's probably only maybe 15, 20 years old.
Brand new, 15 years old.
Well, it is brand new compared to 60-some
Totally.
year old molds.
No, that's what I love. When we're talking about
Some of the ones like that. There's the World's Fair. I mean, there's all the ones from the '62 World's Fair those are still original castings from '62, and I still got all the molds for them.
And those will last as long as you could.
Those
run
will
them.
last as long as you got them.
They don't make them like they used to, or maybe
As long as you don't drop them in something and melts them down, you're good.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, like, I want to talk about that because, like, that is sort of the technology that you're working on is like it's sort of time stood still. What are the challenges with, you know, you've got 70 machines. What are the difficult things about servicing and running, you know, these machines that are this old?
Well, they're all identical on the inside, so it's nothing. You don't have to figure each one out.
So that's easy. What are the hard things? Is there anything hard about it? I mean,
Sometimes, I mean, just there's certain things that happens that takes a little bit to figure out.
Yeah, and there's some parts that do get kind of difficult to get,
Right.
where you have to,
Or you make
come
them.
up with an equivalent, or you have to actually make it.
Right, you
Yeah.
come up to equivalents.
so right. So you have to make parts sometimes. You're machining your own parts so that you can continue to repair and service these things.
Or try to repair what you had to fix.
Which is not, you know, when I sound like a super old man when I say this, but like, you know, that is not how, you know, goods are made now, right? I mean, like, things are made with planned obsolescence, and the idea is that, yeah, my phone is 3 years old, and you should throw it away, Tim, and you should get a new one. You know, the idea that the technology is actually not user repairable, right? I mean, you guys are both way more technical than I am, but, you know, were those machines made to be serviced like this way? I mean, like, how does that work? Is it? I mean, you make it sound really easy, and maybe it is because you're way smarter than I am. But
It's
you know,
not.
It's not easy. See, there you go. See, that's Brian. That's why you're here. See, this is like color commentary. You're like my Steve Stone. Yeah, so I mean, like, what are the other challenges? I mean, is it just like, you've been working with these machines for so many years that it just, you look at it and you're like, oh, that's the problem.
I can listen to it. You can listen to the machine. You can hear if everything's working right. If you just listen.
So you're like the Mold-A-Rama machine whisperer. You can just be like,
it's just you know what the thing should sound like. So it's just you listen to it and you can hear the pumps running. You can make sure you can tell by listening to it that everything's fine. That everything works as what it's supposed to be. And there's just certain things we go out and check and make sure as you're going around checking machines that you check as you go through it. That just is something normally we do and just check everything before you even do anything else. Before you even notice if anything's wrong with it.
yeah, no, that's really cool.
Yeah, he's being pretty humble about that.
Yes. Can you do some color commentary here?
I've seen him say he could pick out that the hydraulic unit in this one is using this kind of metal for the lines, and it makes a different noise when it works. It's down to that level.
Well,
That's almost
like Brian's machine, he's got metal lines inside the machine, which was the design for 1962. So when the machine runs, it's got a certain whistle to it that you hear when the machine's actually running. That sounds different than the ones that got plastic lines on them.
Yeah, so it's really crazy. So you can tell just from different tones of a liquid flowing through a tube what's
the
going
sound
on.
is.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So, Brian, talk about a little bit your process of trying to restore one of these. I mean, you are no slouch, like, technically, mechanically. Like, how was that process for you?
Well, thankfully, in my case, most of it was cosmetic. Tim had already done most of the restoration work of the interior of it. Mostly, I just looked at it, crossed my eyes a little bit, and then dug in and learned what everything did and where it all went. Because it's simple, but it's a somewhat complex series of events that have to happen. But really, the part I did was all the skeleton around it essentially was, it was 60 years old and had been stored wherever. So, some of the pieces were bent or had holes that were drilled in it over time, or, whatever happens to a machine as it sits. So we were able to, welded some parts back where they were supposed to do, bent things back, repainted everything, all the stickers and everything on it were replaced. In my case, I did what I had to make it match the original Disney style, and those had different types of like pinstriping around the tubing, and the surface of it had toys that were made by the Marx company, and I think they're early 60s toys.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
like 60,
So, yeah.
63, 64, somewhere in there.
Yeah, so when you look out there at the machine and you see all these classic Disney characters, those had to all be found because they're just 65 years old as well. So you have to just go and find them. And I have a Brer Rabbit that's on it that came from Norway. That was the way I had to get that one.
Well, now, were those toys made specifically for the interior of the machines, or they just
No,
used something that was
they were
specific?
actually sold to the public.
Okay.
But if you run across anything, it's got maybe a hole drilled in the foot or a hole in the hand. I've ran across a few of them that were like that I actually bought a couple that I didn't have, and they were drilled already because they came out of Pennsylvania, because there was actually a storage warehouse for the machines up in Pennsylvania.
Wow, that's
The
crazy.
original storage building for ARA was up there that they kept everything at.
That's cool. So these machines, like the Disney ones specifically, were made for Disney theme parks, right? No, they weren't.
They were made for the World's Fair.
Okay, but they were sort of made with Disney, like, Disney's approval and all that.
Well, yeah, Walt made all the molds. He designed all the molds for them. Walt actually designed all the characters and all
Really?
the Disney characters. He also designed all the presidents' heads.
Wow, I did not know that.
Because he did, what was it, the House of Presidents?
Yeah,
Hall of Presidents up there at the World's Fair. He did
Yeah,
the
it
Hall of
started
Presidents.
with meeting Mr. Lincoln, I think.
Right, it was
Was
Mr.
the
It was
first
Lincoln. The
animatronic.
first one was Lincoln, and then they did like 7 or 8 different presidents busts.
Well, that's pretty cool that he was like so directly involved in this. I actually didn't know. I'm not faking. I actually didn't know that until just now.
Yeah, there's a lot of the Disney piece of it. Being a 30-year Disney cast member myself, that's part of the history of the company I work for, is something I'm really interested in. So you find out that as you unpeel the layers, that these were really made as a promotional thing for Disneyland, but they were also a kind of like a subcontracted thing to a lot of the different
to go around the World's
pavilions
Fair.
at the World's Fair. So the It's a Small World pavilion was not really it wasn't a Disney pavilion. It was Pepsi, I think.
Yeah, it was a Pepsi or somebody.
And this is
Yeah.
the 64 World's Fair in
Right,
New York
New
City.
York, in Flushing, right?
Flushing Meadows. Yep.
Yeah.
New York World's Fair was probably the biggest reveal for the machines because they probably had the most scattered around the fair.
Yep.
Right. And so the machines existed before that, right? Into the early
Right,
60s.
the machines premiered at the 62 World's Fair.
Got it.
In Seattle, right?
Yeah, Seattle World's Fair. But the 64 Fair probably gave it the most exposure and different things. Because Sinclair did dinosaurs. They did the big Sinclair Dino exhibit. Then after the Dino exhibit, they went on tour to the Sinclair gas stations when the dinos went traveling. And they traveled around the different gas stations, the Sinclair stations, and set the machines up and had dinosaurs there for short times.
Yeah. So I think that's fascinating. Brian, you mentioned that. Like, does modern day Disney, are they aware of that? To your knowledge, are they aware of that connection to Mold-A-Rama?
They are. Tim actually displayed one at D23. I think it was the very first D23.
And that's the big Disney
had about
convention,
Well,
right?
it was their, what was it? It was the anniversary of the 64 World's Fair that they did. They did a big history thing inside the Contemporary, and I put the machine in there with Mickey on it, and they had a bunch of other stuff displayed from the World's Fair.
Yeah, but I mean, coming to the modern day piece of it, we weren't sure. So we wanted to run the Disney molds at the last replay in 2019, but we weren't sure how the copyrights and all of that held up. So I actually went to our Imagineering and got permission to run them.
Wow, and that wasn't a
So-
problem.
No, they were actually very, very happy and friendly.
I'm sure they didn't have. I'm sure a lot of them have no idea that these things even existed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because,
I ended
there
up
was
going
really
to the,
no really good record keeping for any of this stuff. I mean, they didn't keep very much of records in the 60s.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's my experience even with digging with companies who did stuff in the 80s. You know, like, wait, we did that? Yeah, I just told you did that. Well, we didn't know. You know, so
Right,
like,
and
I'm sure
they-
it's a similar situation, but they're aware of it now.
Yes.
You put it on their radar and,
Oh yeah, Brian threw us under the bus.
yeah, thanks a lot, Brian. Well, I'm just glad that they were cool with it and they understood like what you're doing. And I mean, really, it is some of the history of Disney, and you know, just the fact that it's not just some one-off thing. It's like Walt Disney was actually directly involved with it.
Yeah. You know, as you start to chase the history of all of that, and you start to connect that these were made around the same time that they were building the initial version of It's a Small World. So you see a lot of similarities in the color schemes and the artwork. So
That's super cool. Anything else, you guys? I feel like I've touched on sort of the technical side and sort of the little bit of the history. Now we're talking about like specifically your neck of the woods, like literally speaking. You know, all the states that you cover, and there's another family, right? The Jones family, am I
Yeah,
right?
the Jones family.
Right, and so they're the ones who run it out of Brookfield, Illinois. And do they have similar? I mean, you know them, you know, better than anybody else. Do they have similar stories? I mean, how did it be? There were more people that running these companies before, right?
There was.
Tell me about that.
I think there was because originally ARA leased the machines to you, so there was, I think, several different companies people that leased the machines.
Right, so they were all independent operators.
Right, they're all independent, and they paid a lease price to the ARA, and then when ARA decided to get out of it, they started selling equipment off, and some of the guys bought their equipment, and other ones just got out of it.
Yeah.
So there, at the end, I think there was like maybe 3 or 4 left, and my grandfather was one of the original ones. And then the family in Chicago, when they bought the machine, when they got into it, machines, they bought from a lot of the original people that leased them. So they were buying up stuff from people that already purchased it from ARA.
Right, so they're basically they're consolidating, you know, taking over sort of these routes and these places that are still existing, right? And they're just sort
Right.
of
They took over the pre-existing places they had, and then added more to it. But they've also bought out bunch of different leasers.
So in some ways, this sort of sounds like very similar to what happened in the 80s with arcades, right? Is that, you know, you'd have distributors and then you'd have operators of these machines, and people would have they call it a coin route, right? right? And you'd be responsible for machines that were here and there, and then travel those, and you'd split the coins.
Right, that's basically what they were doing up there. And then when like my grandfather, he was an original leaser, leased them originally, and then when he bought them out, they were his.
We talked about this a little bit yesterday. Why did your grandfather do that? Like, I mean, he could have been like, oh, I'm going to work on other stuff. He had another business.
He did an appliance store. He had an appliance store, and he did contour chairs, and he used to travel the fairs with the contour chairs.
So he was doing multiple things.
Right, he was doing multiple things, and then he just seen the machines, and he just brought one home.
And he clearly liked them. And he was a bit of a Renaissance man as well, right? Because he's repairing these machines, but he was also making the molds, right?
Right, he was making he literally made the sculptures. He made it from the sculpture all the way to the finished product. He would do it.
That's really cool. That's pretty awesome.
Until it was time to put it on the machine, he did everything.
That's cool. That's cool. What else? What did I forget, you guys? And then I want to open it up for questions.
Oh, we want Brian to talk about the castle.
Yes, talk about the castle.
I mean, back in the '60s, there were very few really dressed out machines from the Disney side of things, and there's only 2 or 3 pictures that you can even find out there of a Disney Mold-A-Rama machine with this paper. It's a paper castle that was made actually by Imagineering in California, and it's got 2 sides that go down it that surround the entire thing to give it the Sleeping Beauty castle look that you see. But there's really, out of the few that are even known to have existed, Tim happens to have one, had another one, but over time they've deteriorated and they're very fragile. So
there's paper, right?
they're just paper, paper and paint. So he was kind enough to let me borrow one to recreate it, to make it look like it did back in the day.
So these are all the exact measurements and everything
Yep.
like that. I mean, that's how you would do this if that's the Brian way.
If you could see the original castle, a lot of that stuff, the paint, some of it's peeling, some of the cones on top are deteriorated. I mean, it's 50-some years old, almost 60 years old.
Yep.
And talk about the texture. I was really interested. I couldn't. My eyes got really wide when you talked to me about how you got the texture on this.
Yeah, most of the textures and the colors and everything are actually straight out of It's a Small World. So I reached out to some friends that are in Imagineering and Disneyland in the shops out there today, and it eventually led to Raleigh Crump, who was one of the 9 old men from Disney, and I finally got the answer of just what that pebble texture is. We tried to match it. We tried and tried. It turns out it is crushed glass and crushed walnut with Mod Podge glue over the top of it. So you have to do these. It's a 4-layer process just to get that stony looking texture that is on all the paper.
So you're in your garage crushing walnuts and crushing glass.
No, you can get part of it as a tumbling media today.
Okay.
And the other part of it, oddly enough, we found the right kind at Michael's, of all things.
Of crushed glass.
Of crushed glass.
All right.
Yeah.
So if you guys I don't want you guys all running out to Michael's and buying crushed glass. They're gonna be like, "What did you hear at this panel?"
But we recreated everything exactly the way it was done. Like, everybody grew up making paper cones, but these are a totally different way of doing it. So we actually peeled one of them apart and scanned it, and were able to trace the pattern of just how they made these cones, which is the most frustrating experience of my life. Because you're sitting there.
Because it's not how you would think you would do it, right?
My guess is they have some kind of special cone making tool back in the day, but I just got 2 fingers and stand there until the glue sets.
I hope you don't glue your fingers to it.
I did that a lot. But I mean, we kind of paid attention to the detail all the way down to the walls. The original, all it was 2 layers of oil board glued together and cut. So that's exactly what we did here. It's 2 layers of oil board, like the original.
Right. So you're very much like approaching this not just like, let's just make the decoration that's on top, but you really want to restore it like you'd restore a vintage car, right? You're trying to use the same types of materials and the same things so that it is a perfect reproduction.
As perfect as you could get. But it's something that's so awesome, and you just don't see it anymore, and it deserves to be seen again. It needs to have that second life, so people can see the artistry and the way things were done in the earliest days.
And the thing is, I let him borrow the original. I couldn't even see this one until it sat on top of the machine here at Free Play. He wouldn't even show it to me.
Brian likes the secrets, you know. It's like you gotta have the unveiling, you know. It's the just the unveiling part of it.
That, and I just want to drive Tim nuts.
That's awesome. All right, well, why don't we do questions? Do we have a mic that we can pass around out there? Or I can just throw you this one?
Here, catch.
Yeah, let's not do that.
Got one right there.
Yeah, a question, I guess is a materials question. I have Santa Claus blow foam. I've got the buckets, you know, the jack-o'-lantern buckets and that stuff, but it's not the same plastic. I don't know, I'm guessing polyethylene or something, but I don't see anything else in the world that has that soft consistency and the smell. Is it how do you get the material? Is it something that you have to special order from?
It's all special ordered through Honeywell, and it's actually what they used to use it for, and they used it for years, was like a washout material for heavier industrial injection machines, because it's such a thin consistency compared to what they normally use in those, that they would use it to wash out the machines when they got clogged or they filled up, or that's what they'd use it for.
Ah, okay. But it's not used in any consumer product.
It's not
at
used.
all.
No, it's not
Okay,
used.
that was.
We're the only ones that use it anymore. Nobody else uses it.
Yeah, I've never seen it anywhere else. Okay, thank you.
So literally, yeah, the only reason that plastic exists
Is for us.
for them. Yeah.
So you guys, this blew my mind. So they only make it for you and the Mold-A-Rama folks in Chicago, right?
Yeah, they only make it for the two of us now.
That's amazing. That totally scared me. Like, you're not worried about it, but it totally freaked me out. It's like, you know, this is a huge company that makes this.
When you order a truck and a half load, that's 20-some pallets right there.
So it's worth their while.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool. There's another hand over here. Was there another question?
I have two questions, actually. So, of course, because it's niche and, you know, people are picking it up as, like, a hobby, has anybody ever, like, created, like, an app for tracking down, like, different Mold-A-Rama locations? Is there a website where people, like, keep up with, like, new additions when you put out new molds and stuff like that?
Yeah, if you go to my website, Unique Souvenirs Inc.,
Okay.
bring it up, and I got a Facebook page, too, so when I do something new, it gets changed on Facebook and on the website.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and then you said you also, obviously you maintain the machines from the 60s. How do you retire a machine? Like, what determines when a machine is just done? Like, is it?
It doesn't get retired, it just gets rebuilt.
Okay, so they don't, like,
They don't retire and go to a retirement home. It goes back to the shop and gets torn
I just didn't know if
apart.
they, like, fired out, you know, if they just
No,
became,
no,
like,
no.
a danger hazard. But I guess, yeah, it's the guts. You're changing the guts constantly on the machine.
Basically, when something breaks down, it's getting changed on location, or it gets changed right there.
Have
It's
those-
not that often I bring one back to do something in the shop.
Okay, and that brings me to, have those parts ever become obsolete? Like, have you ever had a hard time finding the parts to replace the guts inside of the machine?
Nah, because a lot of stuff I've made a lot of things. I've made a
Oh.
lot of the parts already.
That's, okay.
If I need something, I'll custom make it, or I'll find somebody that can do it.
Yeah, okay, yep, fair point. Okay, next.
Yeah, and then there are solutions for the hobbyists like mine that's not going to run 24/7 for a year. There's options that are a little bit less industrial just to keep it going. But
Well,
yeah,
and sometimes it makes it a little bit quieter for people that run them in their homes, that it's not so loud when personal collections.
yep.
Oh wow, I didn't realize that. So there are actually different parts you can.
There's
You have a
things I can-
silencer
there's-
package.
Yeah, it's like putting a suppressor on.
It's okay. I'm not going to ask any more questions about that. But I did want to say, you had asked about if someone's tracking those. I know there are some fans there's a Facebook fan page, the Facebook group, and there's somebody who has actually tried to generate a Google Sheets listing of every mold that's ever existed, and it's very, very detailed. So you can look that up. It should be pretty easy to find. I mean, I think there's at least 300.
It's what? It's Mold-A-Rama, Matic.
There's a couple
Collectors group?
actually. There's one called Mini Molds. I don't know who.
That's actually the one guy, but the
Yeah,
one
that's
that
Craig,
everybody-
who I think
Craig,
he's
yeah.
the one who maintains that
Right.
list.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Many Molds is his Instagram, and he's just got photos of all of his different molds. And I think it's really interesting because it's like, we didn't talk about this one, but I know there was a Converse. Like Converse did a couple machines for like a promo, and they have like a boom box and a sneaker.
They did the boombox first for a promotion in, what was it, Colorado, I think they did it. Mm-hmm. And then they did the Converse tennis shoe for their release of a new shoe that they released in about 5 years ago, something like that.
And do they work with you on that one?
Yeah, I did the molds for them.
All right, we need to talk about that after this panel. I don't have either one of those.
And strangely enough, there's actually a machine in Bad Robot Studios of
No, their logo. It's the Bad Robot. When you see at the end of the show, you got the little robot that says Bad Robot Productions.
J.J.
There's
Abrams,
actually a mold of J.J. Abrams' Bad Robot.
And was he a fan? Is that how that went down?
Yeah, he's actually got a machine sitting in his office.
That's cool. I love that.
Jeff Dunham, the
Yeah,
ventriloquist,
Jeff
is
Dunham's
also
got
a fan
several
and
of
has a
them.
machine.
Who's that? Who's Jeff?
Jeff Dunham.
Comedian.
The Peanut.
Ahmed.
Oh, okay.
The ventriloquist puppet, yeah.
Yeah, well, Peanut's the biggest one. Peanut's.
Yeah. Yep.
That's cool.
So-
All right, there's other. I see more hands.
I can't see nothing.
Is there a like the collectors? Is there like a unanimous decision on what is the most rare toy that's out there right now, or the most rare mold?
Some of them do. Some of them, there's some that they will never, nobody will ever find. There's some that just you'll never get.
Like, give an
It's
example.
because-
Of what's one that's really rare? Super
I had
rare.
the Better Homes and Gardens building from the '64 World's Fair. The Vatican from the '64 World's Fair.
I want a Vatican. Come on. Every
I'll-
kid wants
the only-
their own mold of the Vatican.
The only ones I've ever seen are pictures. I've never even held one or seen one. I've got pictures of them both, and that's it.
Yeah. The Purple People Eater is one that I think you can. It's very rare, but you can still get your hands on one if you try.
Well, that mold set still exists,
Yeah.
and that's actually in the. It's in Chicago. At the one guy wrote a book on Tyke Miller. He's got the mold actually, the mold set for People Eater.
Yeah.
Wow. And we were talking about there was a fairy castle that was run in the Museum of Science and History. in the 80s.
Yeah, that's huge. That's
Right.
a big mold.
And that mold does not exist anymore.
Oh, it
right?
exists.
Oh, it does?
Yes, he's still got it. It's
Oh, okay.
just
He won't
it's
run it.
not one to run because it's too much. It's a lot of work to get it to run.
I had one when I was 8 and I broke it. And now I find out that they go for hundreds of dollars on eBay. It's like,
Could have
stupid
retired.
kid.
Could have retired off that one mold.
Yeah, the one mold. All right, what other questions do we have?
So I know there's not a lot of private collectors, but can y'all talk real quick about how many people actually have it? Like I believe there's one in like Third Man Studio with Jack White. Is that correct? Or like how many people actually privately own a machine?
Jack White actually does own two of them. He's got one in Detroit and he's got one in Nashville. And then there's probably maybe 30, 40 other collectors that have them in their private homes.
They're not easy to get a hold of, and even if you can't get a hold, if you can get a hold of one, it's not that simple to get it going. See, yeah.
No, it's not like it's not a consumer product necessarily in terms of servicing. So if I were, flush with cash and I just wanted to buy a machine, what does a machine cost?
Well, the last one that went across Barrett Jackson was a Sinclair Dinosaur. It went for over $100,000.
Wow. And is that just because there was that specific machine, or just they all cost that much?
No, they went across Barrett Jackson, and they wanted to sink because it was a Sinclair Dinosaur, and everybody didn't know what it was.
Yeah, that was a lightning strike. But I would say on
that was
average,
most average is about 35,000.
So you can have a car, or you can have a Mold-A-Rama machine.
Well, the other one you can either have a house or you can have a machine.
That's true.
Live in a house or live in the machine.
It smells good. All right. Any other questions that we have?
The material you said it goes in the bottom is like a 1.5 to 2 gallons. How many molds does that make before you have to replenish and go out there and service it and fill it back up?
That's a great question.
Each mold weighs maybe 2 ounces. So
Don't make me do math. How many is that?
Make me do math.
I don't do math. That's why.
I don't do that. Roughly, you can get about out of a 50-pound bag is what usually holds in the machine, the whole total machine. And out of 50 pounds, you can get maybe between 400 to 600 molds. It depends on which mold you're running.
There's some molds that use a lot of plastic, so like the
Dinosaurs.
the dinosaurs, because they're large, so
I wanted to ask you about, and we'll come back to questions. I don't want to lose these questions, but there was something in Brookfield. They were running a mold. I think it was an alligator that had been running green plastic for years and years and years, and then they changed it to white.
That can take years and years and years to go to white.
So why is that? Is it just because there's just green in the machine everywhere, or like
Because on the bottom of the machine, there's always some of the residue was sitting there forever. It took me almost 3 years to get the Gator one at Gatorland to go white.
Wow, and that's just like you can't just clean it out. You just have to
Oh,
keep
you can
running.
clean it out, but if you want to drain all the plastic and keep flushing it and or tear the whole thing apart and do it that way, it's the only way you're going to get it all out of there.
Got it. So it makes
that's what
way
we
more-
were saying earlier about how changing the color is just not that simple.
Yeah.
You have to get all of whatever the previous color was, or re-dye the current color to get a different color.
Wow. Okay. And that was fun for that one. Like then there was like you had the dark green, and then the green got really light, and then it was lighter, and then it was white.
The best ones are if you do a color change and then you just mix it up and run it. The first ones you get out of it's like a marble color.
Do you ever do that? I don't think I've ever seen one like that.
Yeah, I got a bunch of them.
All right. See, he's got the hookup. All right. Were there any other hands? I saw some other hands back here.
What do you think is the most challenging part of maintaining the Mold-A-Rama machines? Are there like any particular parts or anything with the machine that's like particularly difficult to maintain over time?
There's quite a few things. I mean, sometimes when you walk out to it, you got to see what's going on. I mean, really, the hydraulic units and if you run into a short inside the machine, it's chasing down a wire. If you run into something you got to trace down, it can take you a little while to go through the harness.
Yeah, and the original ones are all leaf switches, like a pinball machine. So as a leaf switch bends or it gets corroded or just simply the machine vibrating makes a wire short, you got to trace that
The
down.
worst part is people walk around the parks with the leaf blowers and blow all the dirt inside the machines.
Oh.
They blow all that stuff right up inside the switches, and that's what causes the biggest problem right there.
Yep.
And most of these machines, when they're outside, are they covered? Are they usually covered, or sometimes?
They've got a roof over them.
Okay. And is that enough as long as it doesn't get too cold, right?
Right, as long as it doesn't drop below 40s and stay below. I mean, down here in Florida, it's not so bad. It can get down to 40s, but by noon, you're in the 60s, 70s by noon.
Cool. That was a great question. Any other questions? I see a hand over here.
What is the biggest Mold-A-Rama machine?
Can you say your question again?
What is the biggest Mold-A-Rama machine?
The biggest mold, is that what you're
Yeah.
asking? Yeah, what's the largest one?
The Lunar Lander's probably the biggest one of all, the original molds. And then probably since the ones I just did for Universal Studios was the bear for Halloween. That's probably the biggest ones.
Wow.
That's almost an 8-inch bear, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's a pretty good sized bear.
He's a good sized bear, but also the Lunar Lander stands about almost, 8? It's about 8 inches tall for the Lunar Lander, and that's a big one.
Yeah, for me that's my favorite mold because it's kind of flat on the back, but it captures a lot of the detail and
All the
dimension
details
of
in the front
a
of it.
lunar lander, the actual pod that landed on the moon. So it's from during the 60s, the space race and everything was huge. So there were a lot of molds that were at Kennedy Space Center. So I like to collect those, all the various rockets and space shuttles and moon related stuff.
That's cool. Any other questions?
So all the machines, they're all from the 60s, the original run of them, is that correct? Or
Yeah, they're all originally from the 60s. None of these have been replaced or remanufactured or made new.
So they just kind of made one run of them, and that's all that exists.
They made two runs of different styles. There's a 62 style, which everything is exposed, like the cam and everything for the leaf switches and everything's on the deck. And then the 64, they revised it and put all that stuff on the inside of the machine. And they put a countdown glass across the top of the 64 model.
Oh yeah, I know that.
Yeah.
Do we
You
know
could
how many they made total?
It's one of those things that the way they did numbering for this is really tough to tell because they did the same thing with pinball machines, the way they numbered all this stuff. And I know there's at least 300 in existence still right now. And I'd say it was at least maybe 700-800 that were actually totally made.
Okay.
But a lot of them got, when they went out of business, when ARA got out of it, they were scrapping stuff. They scrapped a lot of it out and just trashed it all.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, I think we're about out of time. So Brian, Tim, thank you guys so much for this time. This was fascinating for me. Hopefully you guys found it interesting too. Let's give them a hand, you guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.